Welcome to the Analytics Power Hour. Analytics topics covered conversationally and sometimes with explicit language. Here are your hosts, Mo, Michael, and Tim.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Analytics Power Hour. This is episode 212. Right at the top of any senior executive's list these days is the need to unlock innovation within their org. And, how do we do that? And how do we, in the data world, play our part in that process? Frankly, a lot of talk happens about this in the world, and it's hard to find people who are really mapping out a plan and executing effectively. And I think that's what we really want to talk about today is, who's out there doing that. And, Mo, I think about you as a data leader at Canva, and I know you're working in a very fast-growing organization. But, do you see this as something that you're grappling with in terms of your role?
This is legitimately the reason that I can't sleep, other than babies. Yeah, it's pretty much what keeps me up at night in work thought stuff. Yeah.
So that's perfect. And Tim, my other co-host here, you've been in the analytics space for, I don't know, forever, 20 years-ish now. And I know you've been a part of every layer of this. So I'm excited to see what you think about this as well. And I'm Michael Helbling. But to get this show off on the right foot, we wanted to invite a guest, someone whose career has been built around doing this at scale. Dr. Tiffany Perkins-Munn is a managing director and head of marketing data and analytics at J.P. Morgan Chase. Prior to that, she held senior research and analytics roles at BlackRock, Citadel, and Merrill Lynch. She was recognized by CDO Magazine as one of the top 100 global women leaders in data and analytics, and today she is our guest. Welcome to the show, Dr. Tiffany Perkins-Munn.
Hello, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I think a great way to kick off this conversation is just be to learn a little more about you and some of your background. And obviously you've held a number of these roles, and so these are big organizations that you've kind of had some pretty significant impact with. So I'd love to just hear a little more about your story, and we can kind of take the conversation from there.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I've worked across the street. I've done investment banking, retail banking. I'm in consumer banking now. I used to work at a hedge fund. So I have had experience. I've worked in global markets, and I've always been in the data and analytics space. So I probably am one of the few people who know where all the bodies are buried, so to speak, in data anyway. Really trying to make the connection between, as an industry, as a financial services industry, what are some of the similarities or what's consistent across the different types of financial service businesses? What can we learn from each other? So I've been in that space for a very long time, sort of working across the different industries in a very interdisciplinary way. And when I say interdisciplinary, I mean taking learnings from my time in market research. So lots of different opportunities to understand what some of the challenges are with data and where some of the innovation is coming from in data, and then to apply that to what we're doing here in the financial services space. And then ultimately, there was a period in my life when, this is going to sound really off the beaten path, but I completely left the street, right? So in 2010, my husband was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. That was in April of 2010. And in September of 2010, he passed away. And my daughter was 5. And I was trying to figure out, what do I do now? I'm working in the city. At the time, I was at a hedge fund. I'm leaving my house at 5:30 in the morning. So what do I do in this situation? And I decided to actually leave the street. And I ended up doing a franchise. So I worked with a franchise consultant. You want to work with a franchise consultant who has a breadth of inventory because you don't pay them. They get paid by the business that you decide to invest in or to buy. And so you want somebody who can introduce you to a breadth of opportunities, right? And then ultimately they came back with Title Boxing Club. Title Boxing Club is a concept where, I don't know if you've heard of it, but you wrap your hands, you put on boxing gloves, you work out to a trainer on a heavy bag. It can burn up to 1,000 calories an hour. Sounds like I'm a walking ad for it, doesn't it? I don't own it anymore. But so I went into Title Boxing Club, and we had like over 500 locations. We had clubs in Cancun and internationally. It was a wonderful opportunity and a very unique opportunity to once again use data and analytics in a different way, right? So now here I am with trainers and food plans and point of sale systems and operational models that are extremely completely different from what we have been doing in financial services. And I am like the ultimate boss. Like there's no one above me. Like it all stops with me. So really figuring out how we could be really critically thinking about the analytics, even analytics around how we chose our location, right? So where are the most successful locations? How do we build like a model to help us predict whether or not a location will be high performing, moderately performing or not? So anyway, I did that for 5 years. And then after I had done it for 5 years, I was presented with a choice, actually. Like someone with whom I had worked came to me and said, I am going to be the CMO of JP Morgan. And I need an analytics team. And are you interested? And, you know, I was all in my gym days. I was like, nope, I will consult with you.
Wow.
I'll help you build the team. I'll find you a great analytics leader. But I am really into this gym. And, you know, I had bought multiple territories, so I was supposed to build out these other territories. So that's how we started. And then I just realized that I was getting pulled in more and more and more and more and more. So when the time came where I really had to make a decision, should I get out of the lease or not get out of it? It was up. 5 years, the lease was up. I needed to renew. Should I renew the lease and build out these other territories, or should I go into JP Morgan full time? I had a very hard decision to make. And ultimately, because I was really enjoying the work I was doing at JP Morgan and I was hoping it would last, ultimately I decided to let the lease go. I sold the other 2 properties that I had not yet built out, and I came to JP Morgan Chase. And at that point, I came into the global markets or the investment banking business. And so there was a period where I was gone, but I was still very focused on analytics. And then I was back.
But so what, like I'm dying to know, what about the work that you were doing at JP Morgan sucked you back in? Like there must have been something in you that was triggered of like, I really enjoy this and I find it fulfilling and this is interesting. Like what were those things?
So
you had to have missed the regulatory environment.
Oh yeah. There it is. How'd you guess?
That's right.
You know what it is that because of the type of business that JP Morgan is, meaning like it's been around a long time, they've tried lots of things. They're often first mover in many places. In this space, especially in the investment banking space, it's still not a space, just generally speaking, where I find firms are really forward thinking when it comes to what we're doing in data and analytics, right? Because the clients aren't consumers. The clients are big, huge firms, right? Like a hedge fund could be a client, or a big retailer could be a client, right? So this was really an opportunity to think about, because ultimately, when you're thinking about how well does your customer perceive you, and you're thinking about customer as a business, as a corporation, here was an opportunity, I thought, to really peel back the onion. Because guess what? Hedge fund number one is not actually making the decision about whether they trade with you or not. There's a trader who's an individual, a person who sits within that hedge fund, who's making that decision in collaboration with probably a portfolio manager, in collaboration with analysts who are probably sending them research. Like there are a group of people who are making these decisions. And in the investment banking space, how can we peel back the onion and get to those people and start talking about this, if you think about it as nested, like if you think, there are schools, there are classrooms, and then there are kids within classrooms in that nested way, how could we use that, which is more of an educational reference, and a hierarchical linear model, which is more of a social science kind of methodology? How could we use that to then think about people who sit on desks, who sit within businesses? Right. And so that was really exciting to me because I saw an opportunity to do something really interdisciplinary. And I saw an opportunity to do something in a space where there wasn't a lot of work happening, because salespeople aren't they're thinking about their account in aggregate. Right. And less about how John Doe, who sits on the account as the trader, is really the one who's affecting change.
So I made the joke about getting back into the regulatory environment. Like, I think of like healthcare and financial services as being two areas where there's like a rich volume of individual person level data. There's so much, if you just put ethics and regulations aside, all sorts of crazy things you could do with it, but you can't put ethics and regulatory stuff aside. So when you were talking earlier, like rattling off a bunch of, CPG businesses or, retail, like how much does that weigh in when you're on the financial services side of things? How much is that a constraint to the innovation when you're using data, or do you just have to be more careful?
Yeah.
And I've had financial services clients where I feel like we run up against that.
I don't feel that it's a constraint to getting the work done. I feel like sometimes it slows us down, right? Because like if you build a model and you want to use that model to then target a certain population, there are regulations that say you need to have that model reviewed by a regulatory board to make sure it's adhering to like fair lending processes, for example. So, and because there is that additional step, it might make you go a little bit slower. But once you get used to the process of how it happens in the sort of the financial services ecosystem, I feel like we start to build that into our process. Like, so when we talk about model building, we're not just thinking about the analytics and the data. We're also thinking about the regulatory pieces, the legal pieces, the compliance pieces, and how those all fit into the timeline, right? And it's not as if we're competing and there's like somebody over there who's doing it faster, because guess what? Everyone has to go through these same regulatory legal compliance hurdles, right? So it's sort of like par for the course in that business. And you just kind of get used to that. But I won't say I completely agree that because it slows us down, it also makes us pay very close attention. Like we have opportunities to iterate, to think strategically. Is that what we're trying to do? What is and ultimately to, these initiatives always start with a product typically has an idea or wants to be positioned differently to the consumer. And so we are always, at least in the role that I'm in now as the head of marketing data and analytics, we're always thinking about what does that one change, even though it's an operational technology or data change internally, how does that impact the consumer? What does the consumer have to do differently now that we made that change? What's the consumer's experience now that we made that change? Is it going to be a hardship, or more difficult for them to do what they're trying to do on the website, for example, now that they made that change? So we're always, I feel like it gives us ample opportunity to kind of flip the question on its head and make sure that we are always thinking about the consumers and how they are engaging with us and what that particular switch might do to change their engagement.
Do you feel like the buy-in that you get from, say, like leadership is also potentially different? Because like I work at Canva, which is total opposite, very, very fast-paced, tech startup, like throw something in the wall, see what sticks, and then like build and iterate. Like it's so fast. I tell people in my team to get whiplash sometimes, which I love. But one of the things that I can see as being like such an advantage to this is like, number one, because there is a lot of regulation, I imagine it has leadership attention. And because it has leadership attention, it therefore, like you might get buy-in to data projects that otherwise you might struggle to get the attention of the leadership team. Is that an accurate?
Yes and no, because in the final analysis, budgets matter. So, right? So, yeah, you could have a great idea. How much is it going to cost? What are the resources that are needed? Are those resources available? Do we need to go pull those resources from somewhere? All of that is part of the decision criteria that goes into whether or not a great idea. I mean, it's 20 or 40,000 people at JP Morgan Chase, the whole enterprise. You could imagine that great ideas are like everywhere. Like, especially as people are in innovation mode, they're thinking about what's next, what's going to be cutting edge, what's going to be forward thinking. So it really depends on, and then sometimes you come across people who are risk averse, right? So some leaders are going to be more risk averse than others. Some are going to be like, go out there and do whatever, use whatever you need. Fine, we'll find the resources, right? And others are going to be more like, that doesn't seem to be in line with our goals for this year. We've already identified our goals. Let's stick with those, unless it's something that's like really out of the box. So you get a mixed bag, I'd say. But in general, I think because of the role that I have in marketing data and analytics, and it sits, I have a big team that works on all of these efforts, and we sit very close to leadership, and I feel that they are very supportive, understanding. They guide us, help us figure out, because as I mentioned, there's so many new ideas coming down the pike, initiatives coming our way. How do we prioritize? How do we figure out, if it's a quick analytics exercise, that's one thing. But if it's like we need to do test and learn for some initiative over several months, that's another, right? So how do we prioritize those competing demands? And sometimes it's like, do we have the data? Is the data, or is this ask, or is a data exercise part of this ask? Does this ask mean that we need to pull disparate data sources together in a way that they aren't pulled together now in order to execute? Or is this an ask that where we already have the data pretty centralized, with a couple of tweaks, we can have easy access to it, right? So all of these are sort of questions that help us determine how we should focus, what we should focus on, and whether or not senior leadership across the organization is going to be really supportive of the idea.
So do you have like the expectations of what the data can do? Like do you run into leaders who are like, go fast? They're kind of in love with the idea of innovation through data, but they have unrealistic expectations that they think that, if they say go, that you have all the data you need and it's centralized and it's just going to be, checking a box. Like how much time do you need, do you and your team need to spend kind of setting expectations that it's not enough to just have enthusiasm. It's not enough to have a billion rows of data, because it may or may not be the right data. Like how much of the work is trying to sort of coach and educate and set expectations?
I would say it's part of every single initiative. It just is, right? Because think about it. The further you move away, if you are a senior leader, the further you move away from where the work is actually happening, like the execution of the work, you lose the ability to fully understand the nuances, the detail, what's involved, who has to do what. You lose all of that. It's just the nature of, sort of moving up through the ranks. So for us, it's really important that we always start at a position where we are, especially if you're not, let's imagine like a CEO of a company who has never been in data and analytics, right? I think it's different when you've been in data and analytics, but just imagine the CEO of a company, never been in data and analytics. The company is really large, so there are lots of hierarchies and levels. And so part of what we do in data and analytics, I feel, and this is not just for JP Morgan, but any role where I sit, is that we are the objective truth tellers. And so in order to do that, it's very important that we don't just take a good idea and run with it, but we really set out the parameters. Like, here are the elements that are involved in the execution of that task. Here's what it will give us. Even though you think it's going to give us X, it's really going to give us Y. Here's what it will take in terms of time, in terms of data, technology, systems, etc. And here's the length of time, because all of these things have to subsequently be socialized. So really working through anytime we build a plan for any initiative, it includes all of those elements. Because for me, it's very important to take people along on the journey. And I say things like, I'm not sure how much you know of this already, but I'm going to walk through it anyway so that we're all on the same page, that we're all aligned, right? Oh. Because you've been in situations where you get halfway through the project and people are like, oh my God, I didn't know that's how you were doing that. And you're like, what do you mean you didn't know? That's how right? So to avoid that, and by the way, it still happens, even with this process. But to avoid that, I really try hard to bring people along on the journey, to make sure we're laying out the parameters in a really transparent, objective way, to keep updating them. It's almost as if you have to build your own communication strategy in a way for every initiative, so that with every initiative comes, oh, okay, I'm talking to the team that's building, I'm talking to technology, I'm talking to these senior leaders, I'm getting together with these senior leaders. Like there's a strategy for how the elements and the process and the development of the plan is executed. And you want to keep that as part of your broader sort of what you have to do in order to be successful list, if you will.
I love that as like a disarming way to like, oh, you probably already know this. They probably don't already know it, but if you ask them, do you know this? They're going to say yes, because they're going to feel like they should know it. So you're like, you probably already know it. Humor me. Let me run through this. And then we don't have to reveal that you didn't know it. And yet you now right. know it. I love that as a strategy.
Yeah, I find it to be very effective.
I just love your point about having a communication strategy for every project, because it's actually something that comes up with my team a lot, is like, how do you actually demonstrate the value of the work that you're doing to the business? And the truth of the matter is, I was actually chatting to a machine learning engineer a couple of weeks ago, and he was kind of like, but the work is so good and everyone should like be actioning this. And I'm like, cool, like that's nice that you think that, but you need to communicate to the business why they should action it and why they should listen to you. Right. It's not enough to just do good work and have it speak for itself. Like the framing of a communication strategy actually implies that you're thoughtful and you're going to put the work in of like, actually, who do I need to communicate with? At what level of detail? How am I going to do that? Like, I think that's something that a lot of data practitioners could like find value in implementing in their everyday work.
Yes. And I think what you want to do is that you want to move the way, well, you know how machine learning technologists and data scientists speak. You want to move it as far away from that speak into the language of the business, right? So when I'm doing my data storytelling seminars, I'm often asking people to not use acronyms, explain things instead of saying it's the, blah, 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 task efficiency methodology. Nobody knows what that is, right? Like, just tell us what it is. And I also, and what happens is that when I go speak to people, so as part of this communication strategy, I'm often talking to people who sit in the businesses for the thing that I'm trying to develop, right? And I start having conversations with them, and those conversations, because they feel very empowered now because I've engaged them, they give me lots of examples of things like, oh yeah, I need to be able to do X, Y, and Z, or I had a client and this is how it worked and it would have been so much better if it worked this other way. Amazing. And then guess what I do? I take those examples and that language and I incorporate it into my presentation so that every time I go see another leader or senior leader, I'm talking through the voice of someone who sits in the business with whom they are, intimately familiar. And I move it away from like regression models and machine learning and supervised learning and more into the language of what they are trying to achieve for the consumer, but through the lens of people who are actually doing the work. And I think that's where the impact really comes. It's really translating because, in the data and data science and engineering space, we do very complex, sophisticated kinds of things that are often difficult to translate. It's as if you speak a different language. And so you really have to figure out how do you then take that and turn it into something. Imagine the person is a super smart person, super smart, but has no data and analytics background, right? How do you translate that into something that's easily digestible, bite-sized, and understandable so that they can engage with it? And then you've won if then you hear them out telling somebody about it and they do it properly. And you're like, oh my God, like that's a big, huge win, right? So, yeah.
Do you see that as kind of a threading a needle of you? I mean, you're not trying to turn the business into data scientists. Certainly, that's the extreme. You're not trying to show all the work and you need to understand what the area under the curve really means. But isn't there a need to say, I need to, through analogy or through, I also don't want to oversimplify it and just get to here's the answer, because we're dealing in data science with uncertainty. Like, do you see that as kind of like that's trying to find the sweet spot where they have enough of an understanding and an intuition about what's been done and how they can interpret that without, you're not giving them scissors and saying, run. You're like, here are scissors. This is what they're for. And these are how they can burn you. You're confident to go and walk over there with the scissors, but I don't think you're going to take off on a mad sprint and get yourself in trouble. Like, do you see it that way with like the data storytelling and the working with stakeholders, that you've got to give them enough of an understanding?
You've got to give someone enough of an understanding, right? So on your journey, on your communication strategy, you will reach a point where you don't have to tell the underlying story anymore, because several layers and levels of data scientists have reviewed it. They've seen it. They've talked about it. They've hashed through it. They understand it. Now you can move to more of just the story. But I do think that it's the progression of things, right? And then you may come across someone who's brand new to the whole initiative, like someone new comes in and is running this business and you need to go explain what's happening. Then in that case, you end up saying, here's how we made that decision, right? And think about it as upper limits, lower limits, we ended up here. This is considered a high percentage, a low percentage, we came out here, right? So still talking to them in very easy to understand ways so that they can understand how a decision was made, obviously without making them feel stupid, but not using all of the sort of traditional jargon that we might use when we're talking to each other.
It's actually sort of a little bit of a slight tangent maybe, but I loved your perspective, which is, like, over the years, have you seen data fluency of business leaders start to shift? Have you seen progression, or how do you feel about that? Yeah, I'd love your perspective.
Yeah, I feel like so I don't know if you guys remember this, but in 2012, Thomas Davenport wrote an article that basically said data science is the new sexy, right.
Sexy.
And I was like, great, because I've only been doing it for 20 years. So thank you, Thomas Davenport.
Yeah.
And now maybe I can actually get paid for doing it. So thank you, Thomas Davenport. But I think that was the start of a broader conversation that had begun to happen across industries that was about how we are, the amount of data that we are collecting is ever increasing, and how can we use that data more effectively and impactfully towards the benefit of the consumer. Right? Like, how could we make that? I can remember, first of all, I'm one of those people who I'm on every social media platform. I bought all of my Christmas presents from Instagram and TikTok this year just because I wanted to see if it was possible.
Wow.
I don't mind if you track me. Please do, and make sure that when you target me accurately. Like that's me, right? Whereas other people are like, oh my God, they're tracking me. But I remember when I used to go on like Facebook or something, and I would buy a pair of shoes on Amazon, say last week, and then I'd go on Facebook, and Facebook would show me that exact pair of shoes. And I'm like, didn't I just buy these shoes? Like, who is behind the scenes working this algorithm? Like, we're going to have a talk, right? Like, come on now. And now you will see they have gotten smarter and smarter and smarter. Not only are they showing me another pair of shoes, they're showing me like earrings that might look nice with those shoes, right? So I think the whole system over the years has gotten smarter, which means that we are now collecting petabytes of data, right? And to the point that was made earlier, all that data is not useful, but people get into their own heads and they're like, oh my God, we have all this data. We should be solving the world's problems. But the reality is a lot of that data, I would venture to say over half of it is noise. It's noise in the system just because we're in this process of collecting everything we know. Like every time we send an email, click on a link, go onto a secure browser, whatever we do, open an app, it's a data collection point, and some of that will be useful and some of it won't. And so I think the discourse has changed so that senior leaders now are cognizant of the fact that data is important, but I would venture to say that they've moved beyond data is important to data is important, but also technology as an overlay is important as well. Like, I feel like there are elements of what we do with products and what we do in technology and how we use data that are coming together now, just across industries in general, in crucial ways to really inform the best use of the data, the pieces that are useful and interesting, how we should run the analytics, what the reporting should look like, right? Because now we're talking about, we don't want a deck. We want an automated report that's pulling, sort of through the analytics to give the insights, right? So all of that is sort of coming to fruition in the world today through the eyes of senior leaders who I think have a better picture or a better idea of what that means, of what having a lot of data means and what some of the pitfalls are, but also some of the opportunities.
So what that makes me think about though is there is this like spectrum, and I saw in one of the presentations you've done previously about, like crawl, walk, run, etc. Like there is a spectrum of, I guess, maturity. And it's really easy for leaders to get really excited and inspired about the buzzwordy stuff, AI, machine learning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And particularly, like you said, at the intersection of how it can be built into products and technology. But the bit that like, I guess is like the core problem that I still struggle with, and particularly as we get more and more data, is like, yes, you can automate this report, but that doesn't necessarily help the business understand what they should do next. And I'm like, I just want to understand from your experience, because you have such an incredible resume. Like, are you still seeing that as a challenge that faces the data community, that particularly with the young people, because the young people coming through, they want to work on all the sexy stuff and trying to get them to
work? I wonder if they want to work.
Zoomer's getting called out.
But like, they want to do sexy stuff. Like, I interviewed someone that was basically like, I don't want to have to do any reporting or like pulling insights or like a monthly report. And I'm like, that's part of the job. Like, part of the job is letting people know like how we're tracking against performance and that sort of stuff. And like, are you seeing this still as like a core fundamental problem? Because for me, I just see like the more data we get, the less good we do at those earlier steps, and the more we try and run towards the advanced methods.
Yeah. I mean, for me, a lot of those advanced methods are really just buzzwords, like you said, right? Like, everybody wants to feel like they're moving into AI. Some people aren't and some people aren't. And that's okay. I think that really thinking about how sort of what that ecosystem of analytics, data, product needs to look like, and then, figuring out like, is this the right level of detail or the right level of connectivity? Like for example, you can crawl, walk, and run at the same time. right? There will be some projects that you will be crawling on, some where you'll be walking, and some where you'll be running. And that's okay. And even when so I hire people all the time, by the way, for who I want to do AI and data science. I want them to do deep learning. I want them to do neural networks. But you know what? One of the primary questions is that I ask them, how well can you move around in Excel? Right?
Ooh.
I mean, drop the mic on that one.
That's a goodie but an oldie.
Right? I mean, to me, you could be tool agnostic as far as I'm concerned. The question is, can you be a critical thinker through data? Can you use a tool, take Excel, because it's a very well-known, well-used tool that even if before you become a data scientist, you should know how to use it, right? Can you manipulate, wrangle, move around in the data to answer questions? Can you organize the data in ways that will help people to understand what you're trying to say and do? So for me, when people are like, you're hiring a senior data scientist with a PhD from MIT, you're asking them to do Excel? Yep. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Because that gives me information about who they are, what they can do. If some people, believe it or not, are stuck in a programming language. And if you ask them to move outside of that programming language, and I mean both physically, like how they program, but also conceptually, because you think in a certain way when you're trained on a programming language, it is very difficult for people to do that. Right? So in essence, it's very important that we are able to be kind of fluid in both the way that we use the data and understanding the technology and helping people to understand what it entails. Like once you're working in Excel and you can do reporting in Excel, I mean, there's obviously a next level of reporting and next level that you could be doing, but I really like people, my personal preference for people who I work with are people who can roll their sleeves up, get really into the data, understand it, get out of the system, move into another system. But whether they're training somebody on what they need them to do in another system or using a specific different system, they know they are able to critically think through data and they know that. So that's generally what is most important to me. And yeah, all of that goes together, by the way, data, analytics, reporting, like it's all part of the job.
I will absolutely judge the crap out of like a media agency when they send a spreadsheet and it's like this data is horribly structured. Like, cause I mean, to me, I love the same question. Like you ask around Excel and like, what do you think of VLOOKUP and pivot tables? And if somebody's like, oh, they scare me. I'm like, if you understand VLOOKUP, I don't care if you don't know SQL yet, cause that's just a join. Like the moving between the languages and thinking about data and watching people do horribly risky things in Excel just because they've structured in a way that's like grossly inefficient and it's not going to have traceability. Okay. Topic for a whole other podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree though.
No, I love that though.
I have a burning question that's a total shift of gears and it goes a lot back to the Thomas Davenport and competing on analytics and driving all this excitement and executives falling in love with the ideas of data. And then you said like sometimes people just want to be, they want to be, what's the business goal for this project? To do AI. You're like, well, that's terrible. That's not the goal. But again, in a large enterprise, when something gets the layer of somebody had what could be a really cool idea to try and data's involved, sometimes like in my experience, mostly being on the outside of it, is that ball starts rolling. And because of the time and the inertia to plan for that, if it gets to a point where it's like, no, this actually doesn't work. We thought that we could use this, and this for personalization and it would drive upsells on this other stuff. Do you run into that it's hard to stop trains? Like it's got the label of fancy data stuff on it, and it's got a lot of people who've had to be involved, and it's got regulatory approval, but it's not actually working. And it's really hard to say nobody's done anything wrong. This just isn't actually a great and cool idea. Like stopping those trains sometimes seems to me like a huge challenge.
Well, that's the politics, right? Because there's some person who owns that initiative, like owns in quotes, who is completely committed to its success. And that is really more of a political minefield that you kind of have to maneuver, right? As I started, when I started this, I pretty much go in saying to people, my goal is to be transparent and objective. I am the bearer of truth. And I am sorry if my truth does not align with what you have built or what you're trying to do. And by the way, you can take my truth and say, screw you, Tiffany, I'm flushing that down the toilet. But I will have done my part, which is to tell you my truth about this particular initiative. So yes, I do think that people get really caught up in its success and are more likely to, have confirmation bias, which is like only paying attention to the things that's like kind of support its success. But I mean, there's nothing really we can do other than state the truth. Like, here are the objective facts. It's not going to work. Doing pilots to help people see that you thought it was going to turn out one way, it turned out another way, probably indicative of an opportunity for you to roll back and not actually execute against the full initiative, right? So I think that's pretty prevalent, but that is a critical use of data. I think if people stop, I find that people are constantly spinning stories with data. Like, I'll go into a situation and they'll say, oh my God, this thing is running so well. This program is working. And then I'll look at it and I'll say, wait a second. This doesn't suggest that it's running so well. This suggests that it's doing mediocre at best, right? And so having someone who can really come in and interrogate the data in that way and offer a different perspective, I think is very important, but also empowering data people to not be politicized, to be the bearers of truth, to state what's objective and be transparent and just call it like it is and have them not worry about losing their jobs, because that's the world that we're in. So I for me, that's the position. But look, I'm not young anymore. I've been at this a long time. I feel very comfortable in my spot saying I'm the bearer of truth, right? Some young kid may not feel that way, but I feel like the onus is on us to instill that level of empowerment, to empower them to hold hands with the data and to let the data drive the outcome. But
you also said, like, you earlier were referring to, I'll expand and put words in your mouth, like you're not trying to tell somebody they're stupid. No. You're not trying to make someone look bad. Like, that's kind of the nuance of like, it's the truth. I'm not here. Let's figure out how we can do the right thing without, throwing someone under the bus. Cause now, like, that's not really productive. And chances are they were trying to do the best that they could, you know.
But so. You know what? Back to the political statement, you have to really understand, especially in these large organizations, how to work the politics. So that means that if there's a big meeting with everyone and you're talking about this research and you've realized that it's not what you thought it was, you don't use that meeting as an opportunity to say, this is not what it's supposed to be. It's wrong. It's, for every initiative, believe me, there's going to be one or two uber senior leaders who are driving that thing forward, especially if it's expensive, right? You simply put a meeting on the calendar with them. They're smart. Sit down one-on-one, walk them through what you found, learned that you now understand. And I find that 9 times out of 10, they come around themselves. They start asking people to pull back. They start asking people to investigate a little more. And before you know it, some of those big initiatives actually kind of die on the vine. But then it means that in addition to data scientist, data engineer, AI leader, whatever, now you have to be like a political strategist. I mean, right? But that's what it is. So...
Yeah. Okay. We have to start wrapping up. No, I'm sorry.
I've had this question since the very start of the episode.
Well, you can blame Tim for asking the last question, which normally Mo gets to ask. I'm sorry.
I feel like you can't break precedent. You got to let Mo ask the question.
Okay, fine. Mo, as per tradition.
So at the start, Tiffany, you were talking a lot about like seeing the same problems across multiple different businesses, like both within companies you worked with and clients and that sort of thing. And perhaps you've caught me on a particularly cynical day, because there was part of me that was listening to you being like, how are you still this excited about it when you do see the same problem over and over and over? And the same is true of the solutions, right? Like when you start talking about some of the exciting things you can do with data, you do look around and like competitors are doing similar things, and like everyone in the market is kind of going in the same direction. Like, for you personally, like how have you kept so excited and interested when sometimes you are dealing with that same problem or the same technology over and over?
Yeah. So I think for me, from a personal perspective in my career development, I've moved beyond what does the data say? Is the technology right? Can we do this? And I've morphed myself more into how can I tell this story, right? And so now when I hire people, for example, I hired what I call data journalists, right? Because now I'm looking for something different, because I personally am doing something different. And it's like, John doesn't believe in that initiative and we have to convince him or whatever, or that thing is running off the rails and no one understands and they have to stop it. And for me, it's not like, oh, well, we have data to support that. It becomes like, how do I tell an interesting story to John to help him understand that this thing is working or this thing is not working, or this analysis is meaningful or this analysis isn't meaningful? It really becomes more of a storytelling endeavor. And that's what really excites me. It's less about the data. It's more about when I bring all of that stuff together with the personalities, with the goals of the broader firm, how do I tell a story to get this thing started, or to stop it if it's something that we need to stop, right? So it has morphed for me personally into a different type of endeavor, that where obviously data technology systems are a critical part, but it's around the ability to engage partners, colleagues, other senior leaders towards my goal. Right? So if I really feel like this is something great and no one sees it, how do I galvanize and get everyone and use data and tell the story to get everyone on board? Right? So it's that kind of exercise for me now.
Oh, that's great. All right. Now we do need to wrap up. What a great conversation, though. A couple things that really stood out to me from some of the things you spoke about. One was how you talked about using regulation. And a lot of times we think of that as like, oh, that sucks. We got this regulation that slows us down. But to actually make it a benefit by being thoughtful and considering the end user experience, I just thought that was brilliant. I also thought the way you described the nonlinear nature of progression in terms of crawl, walk, run as something that can happen all at the same time, that's really something I think that really stood out to me, and I really like that point. And then I love that idea, and we talked about a little bit about that comm strategy for every initiative, and I thought that's brilliant as well, as sort of just being fully functional in that. And there's a lot more stuff, but those were three things that really stood out to me. So thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Tiffany, for sharing with us. That was awesome. It was a lot of fun for us, too. I think from the smiles and laughs and nodding we were seeing us do. So.
And interrupting.
Anyway. Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's like, I want to ask the next question. All right, so, but that's part and parcel, this whole thing. But one thing we do love to do is go around and share a last call, something of interest that maybe might be of interest to our audience, too. Tiffany, you're our guest. Do you have a last call you'd like to share?
In April, I will be speaking in Orlando, Florida at the ANA's Measurement Conference. I'll be both moderating the conference and doing my own session, and I think I'm going to do a session on storytelling. So if anyone is interested, please, by all means, join.
Awesome. And we'll include a link to that in the show notes so people could go find that on our website. All right. Mo, what about you? What's your last call?
Okay. It involves several things because like one article spurred me on to another thing. But I got sent this article from The Verge, which is the titles, we might be wrong, but we're not confused. How Tomer Cohen, Chief Product Officer at LinkedIn, figures out what works best, which was a really interesting read. The funniest thing is that someone sent it to me purely for like this one paragraph that he mentions, which is about data strategy. And then that got me onto something that Jeff Weiner, the executive chairman at LinkedIn, had written about vision to values. And it's this thing, like anyone that has hung out with me recently knows that I have been painstakingly over months working on like our vision, our mission, what our team values are, and all these sorts of things. And I kept having this feeling that like none of those things were truly connected, you know, and for the team, it's like, I don't understand how our team values that we're meant to live every day connect to this like really long-term lofty vision statement. And Jeff's work on vision to values, honestly, just like it made everything click into my brain of like what all the different pieces are so that you can use those like everyday values to then work towards like your operating model and your strategy and your vision. And it just clicked. So I will share the links to those for anyone that is also pandying down the same path as me and needs some inspiration.
Thank you.
Nice. All right, Tim, what about you? What's your last call?
So mine is on the data visualization front. So credit to Drew Goatmiller, who former coworker of mine, pointed me to chart.guide, which is, I know there have been chart guides all over the place, but this is like, to me, one of the best. The poster, you have to put in your email address, but there's an interactive chart guide, but the poster is so spot on with kind of the do's and don'ts of visualization. I mean, it's got a pie chart, and then it's like not recommended. I had tweeted that, and then I gotta give credit to one of our kind of loyal listeners, Mark Alves. That spawned a little Twitter thread, which ultimately wound up with the Economist's visual style guide being shared, which I also hadn't seen. Which, if I ever am in a position again where I get to do a visual style guide or a data visualization style guide for an organization, that will be the model that I absolutely enjoyed going through as well. So I'm still getting value out of Twitter, damn it. And that was me sneaking in a twofer on the last calls, but doing it briefly. So what about you, Michael?
Well, actually, mine sort of springs out of Twitter as well. So there's someone I follow, and I actually may have mentioned him for another reason before, Mike Taylor. He does a lot of stuff with media mix modeling, but he's been writing a lot of essays about memetics in marketing. And they're actually kind of fascinating, and I think he's turning it into a book. But I just found them very interesting. So as marketers, think about meaning and things like that. I think about it sometimes. I'm not a marketer, but I do think about that stuff and sort of like that connection of sort of the presence of meaning and those kinds of things. So anyways, fascinating sort of. I think there's more thought experiments and essays that he's writing, but I think he is putting it into a book format. But we'll include that as well. It's kind of interesting to read some topics. Okay, you've probably been listening, and I guarantee if you're like us, and if you listen to the show, you probably are, you've probably had a few things come up and you've been like, oh yeah, that resonates with me too. We would love to hear from you. And the best way to do that is through the Measure Chat Slack group, which you can join at join.measure.chat, and also on LinkedIn or at our Twitter. So please feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, no show would be complete without a huge shout out to our producer, Josh Crowhurst, who does so much behind the scenes to make the show happen. So thank you, Josh, for all you do. Once again, Dr. Tiffany Perkins-Munn, thank you so much for coming on the show. What a delightful conversation and so much wisdom shared. Really appreciate you spending the time with us. Thank you so much.
Yep. Again, thank you for having me.
All right. And I know that I speak for both of my co-hosts, Mo and Tim, when I say, no matter what stage or what regulatory environment your company's in, remember, keep analyzing.
Thanks for listening. Let's keep the conversation going with your comments, suggestions, and questions on Twitter at AnalyticsHour, on the web at analyticshour.io, our LinkedIn group, and the Measured Chat Slack group. Music for the podcast by Josh Crowhurst.
So smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics. Analytics don't work.
I love Venn diagrams. It's just something about those three circles and the analysis about where there is the intersection, right?
All right, so here we go.
Michael, that is the most efficient.
You're on the ball this evening.
Oh,
Now I'm going to screw it
You're
up.
jinxing it so bad right now.
I'm jinxing it
so bad. All right.
2023.
That's
We
right.
had no technical glitches, and we're ready to go 8 minutes in.
The day is young. All right, let's
Okay.
try this again. Is it going 5, 4?
So they introduced me to things like Dunkin' Donuts, and I was like, what do you do after you open a Dunkin' Donuts? Like, do you work in the Dunkin'? I don't know. Do you just eat donuts all the time?
I remember from those commercials from the 80s, the time to make the donuts guy just going in and out of the kitchen. Yeah.
I mean, it was a great business model, but it seemed like it would be problematic for my health, to be honest. Like, I would be bringing home donuts and coffee to everybody in the house. We'd all have high blood pressure.
Now
Right.
I know it. I love that as a strategy.
Yeah, I find it to be very effective.
I just love that.
It's very holistic. Oh, sorry.
I'm having such a rough day.
Hey, Josh, enjoy editing in the overtalk by the co-hosts. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mo. Sorry.
But it seems... Is my internet shit is that the problem?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I'm the problem, though. Rock flag and be a political strategist.